Thanks, hello everybody. Today I'd like to talk about meetings. We've all had an experience, there we go, yeah. We've all had an experience, I think, of being in meetings that didn't necessarily feel like the best possible use of our time from beginning to end. But still, sometimes we need to do things as a group, and so there's a question about what's the most effective way for us to do that. You know, how do we harness the wisdom of a group to in varied and effective ways, and how do we help our team and the business succeed by contributing to successful meetings? So I think that great meetings have three things. They have a clear purpose, they have a clear format, and in the meeting you understand what your role is. So you know why we're here, what the type of meeting is, and what my role is in the meeting. This, incidentally, is a very important and successful meeting. This is the signing of the original Geneva Convention and the founding of the International Red Cross. So, thinking about these questions, right, starting with purpose. What are meetings for? Why do we need to have meetings? I think that the kind of broad headings that we have here is we have meetings in order to share information. We have meetings to request help, and we have meetings to harness the wisdom of a group. You know, I talk a lot about the way in which systems have emergent properties, and it's also true that kind of the wisdom of a group that's working well together is greater than the sum of its parts. You can kind of think that through, right? Having ideas, there's a great little book about this called, it's a brilliant title, A Technique for Producing Ideas. And this is one of the kind of early advertising gurus of around the kind of like Ogilvy era, right? And he said the way in which you have innovative ideas is you have lots of other ideas. Because new ideas are just, you know, combining old ideas in different ways. So the more ideas that you have at your disposal, the more creativity you can, you know, like produce. So if you have a group who are thinking together successfully, then you have everybody's store of ideas potentially combining with everybody else's. You know, I talk about open culture as being a paradigm for organizations that are better able to think. So that's a reason why we might have a meeting. We might come together to kind of harness the wisdom of the group. And maybe there are some, you know, other reasons as well, but those are some of the reasons why we have meetings. So first of all, like, do we need to have a meeting? Are we doing one of the things that meetings are good for? What is this specific meeting for? Right, that's the next, I think, important question to answer. And, you know, not every meeting needs to necessarily have an agenda. It is possible to have an agenda-queer meeting. But every meeting needs to have a reason. You know, sometimes meetings are kind of like a rambling brainstorm exploration, but that's fine, provided everybody who's in that meeting knows that that's the reason why we're here, is to kind of have like a little bit of a kind of rambling brainstorm, right? So setting out the reason for the meeting and the reason why we're going to have that brainstorm is useful. But an agenda is a great way of providing a reason. Also, I'd encourage that meetings are time-boxed. Right? So you say, okay, this is the stuff that we're aiming to do and we're going to do it in half an hour. Maybe it will run over, but if you said that the meeting is going to last for half an hour, at the end of half an hour, we should say, okay, well, we've had our time, we're still having some kind of discussion. Do we all agree that we want to continue, or what do we want to do, right? We should honour the commitment that we've made. And then, similarly, just as the meeting should have a reason, each part of the meeting should have a reason. Right? If you've got a number of items on the agenda, each thing should be there and it should be contributing to the whole in the same way. And maybe each part of the agenda should be time-boxed. Again, with the proviso that we can extend the time box, but that we have to do that kind of by consent of the people who are there. So I think it's really important that when we're having a meeting that this stuff is clear. The purpose and the length and what's going on there. And you know, if that stuff isn't clear, call it out, right? There was a wonderful thing, which is the kind of the ceremony of Passover begins with the youngest child present asking why are we all here, right? And it's the kind of holiest festival of the Jewish year. It's really essential as a part of the culture, but nevertheless, every year it begins with somebody saying, why are we here? You know, stating the reason and the purpose for the meeting. So meetings should have a purpose, but they should also have an established format, and a format which serves the purpose. So different purposes, different reasons are going to work better with different formats. So for instance, like in Holacracy, they have 3 key kinds of meetings, which they call tactical, governance and strategy meetings. and they each cover like a different set of concerns, right? So depending on the domain of decisions that are seeking to be made in the meeting, they have a different format. And there are a number of things that we can do in building the format of a meeting, right? There are some useful elements that we can draw on. So like an opening boilerplate for a meeting, I think it could be really useful to open a meeting by saying, why are we here, right? Stating the purpose of the meeting, having a check-in round so that people can get their context out of the way and focus on what we're going to talk about. Agenda building, if there isn't an agenda preset, actually going around and saying, do people have stuff that they want to put on the agenda, and then deciding how we're going to go through it. And, like any admin concerns, are the parts of this meeting that we need to time box, right? Are we happy with the way that the meeting is going to be run? There are some other useful kind of elements that we could draw on. Integrated decision making, again, this is a thing from Holacracy. This is a standard part of the way that they do meetings. And when they're seeking to make a decision in the context of a meeting, there is one person who puts forward a proposal. There is then a clarification round where anybody can ask questions about the proposal to understand it more clearly, and the proposer responds. There's an objection round where anybody who thinks the proposal shouldn't be adopted has a chance to express an objection. And those objections are tested to see if they're valid objections, and there are some quite specific ways in which Holacracy gets facilitators to do that testing. And then there's a decision. So, that's one of the ways in which you can say, okay, well, maybe in this meeting what we need to do is we need to form a decision. So there's the advice process, so somebody's putting forward a proposal, and we can kind of move it forward. It's useful to have that as an element to kind of draw on. Constellations is another kind of fairly useful tool that you can bring into meetings. Some of you might have done this before. It's about saying, okay, if we want to test where the group is with respect to a particular idea. So say I'm saying, this is a decision that I'm going to propose to make, and I'm not really sure what people are, what people's attitude towards the decision is. Everybody has a marker, and then you place your marker either closer to or further away from the marker, which is the thing that we're gauging our attitude towards. And this allows us to get a kind of sense of where everybody is. So we can say, oh, look, okay, so you've put your marker super close, so we know that you're in support of that, but yours is kind of a long way away. What's this gap here, and how can we close it, right? It's a way of kind of moving a conversation forward. It's a useful technique that we can bring in. And there are other kind of useful elements as well. There are either kind of formats for a whole meeting or kind of formats for parts of meetings. So, kind of traditional meeting formats, right? There's sort of presentations, moderated discussions, brainstorms, and status reports. And actually most of the meetings that most organizations have take one of those forms, right? But that's actually quite limited to have only those 4 things available. So there's this great set of tools called Liberating Structures, and I'll pop a link out on the channel after this session, which are a load of slightly different formats that you can use in meetings. And the thinking behind Liberating Structures is to say, well, most meetings that people have are either very kind of closed in format, like a presentation is quite closed in format. It's, like this is basically me speaking at you. It's quite tightly structured. Or they're very open in format, so it's like a brainstorm. There's kind of no structure at all. It's super messy. So the purpose of Liberating Structures is to say, is there something that we can have in the middle that's a little bit kind of less strictly structured than a format like a presentation, but a little bit more structured than a brainstorm. So one of the formats that they have is this thing that they call 1, 2, 4, all. So if you're trying to come up with some ideas as a group, the idea is that everybody first has a little bit of kind of silent reflection to think about it, comes up with an idea, then you form into pairs and you kind of sound your ideas out as a pair with each other, and then you form into 4s, and then you come back to the group. And the idea is that it surfaces the ideas from everybody. In a group setting, if you're just like, everybody shouts out ideas, some people are more willing to speak than others. Some people feel more comfortable putting out kind of like outlandish ideas than others. But actually, just in a pair, most people are quite comfortable saying, oh, is this a good idea or a bad idea? So it actually surfaces the full wisdom of the group, really kind of extracts the ideas. But also in your pair, you have a chance to kind of hone the way that you're going to bring that information back to the group. And you get some other kind of banter around that idea out of the way. So actually, the meeting moves quite quickly. There are various other kind of formats that they have as well. They have this thing called 25 to 10, which is a format where you use a load of index cards as a group if you want to work out which of a set of ideas the group thinks is strongest. There's a load of really interesting stuff in there, so I will definitely send that down around afterwards. And they also have some interesting things about, how meeting formats are made up. Like, there's some kind of interesting theoretical stuff there as well. Like other kind of sort of slightly more innovative meeting formats, the meetings of Holacracy, right? They are structured for specific reasons, but they're kind of there as a template for a meeting that achieves something for a team. So the governance meeting is about saying, is the team structure as it needs to be, or do we need to change it? The tactical meeting is about saying, what is blocking us from getting the stuff done that we need to do? What requests do we need to make of each other? And if we're thinking, okay, well, we have these team meetings and we'd like them to be more effective, but we don't know how to do that, we can say, okay, well, maybe what we could do is we could take the Holacracy formats, try them for a couple of weeks, make them our own, but they're kind of there off the shelf, right? Similarly, Agile has a whole set of meetings, scrums, retrospectives, things like that, which can be really useful for teams. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's stuff out there already. Okay, so as well as having a purpose, a meeting should have a format that serves that purpose, and that's a kind of format that encompasses the whole of the meeting, but there are also kind of elements that we can put in which have specific formats. And there are various places that we can draw on stuff and start to build up a kind of library of knowledge in the business that we can draw on to help us at any time. So the final thing that I think is important for a good meeting is to know, do I need to be here? What is my role in this meeting? And if you don't need to be there, check out, right? So, like we talk about the check-in protocol and the idea of kind of going around and everyone brings their context, and that's from the guys who developed it, these guys called the McCarthy Show, and they have this whole set of protocols for teams, and one of them is the checkout. If you no longer need to be in a meeting, you can just say, I'm going to check out, and then you can go, right? Everything is voluntary. Nobody can be compelled to be anywhere. That's the nature of a non-violent organisation. So if you don't need to be anywhere, you can just, don't need to be somewhere. You can say, okay, I'm going to check out. If you are going to be in the meeting, understand, what is your purpose? What role are you playing? So there are kind of various things that it might be useful to do. I'm going to take these from the bottom of the slide upwards, I think, actually. So there's what's known as the 10th man doctrine. And I think this has appeared in a couple of films as well. But it's a principle in the government of Israel, in the Israeli cabinet, that if you have 10 people in a meeting, if 9 people agree with the proposal, the 10th person is required to be that guy in 12 Angry Men, right? The 10th person is required to take the contrary position so that the group can be absolutely sure that it's making the right decision. So maybe your role in a meeting is to be the devil's advocate. Maybe everybody agrees, and it's your job to be the person to actually test, is this really a good idea? Or are we becoming subject to groupthink? Or, maybe there's some stuff that you need to do which is either as the designated facilitator of the group, or that's kind of like facilitation-y stuff that you can see that will be helpful for the meeting. Is that a new issue? One of the principles in the meetings of Holacracy is that we only discuss one issue at a time. And on the work better poster, do one thing at a time. So if we were discussing one thing and we now appear to be discussing something else, it would be really useful to say, is that actually a new issue? Should we take that and put it on the agenda and come to it after the things and actually close this one off first? Sometimes that applies to a whole meeting. Sometimes we're actually, we started out in one meeting and now the discussion has kind of moved on and we're in another. So it can be a really useful thing to call out. Is this a new issue? Is this a new meeting? Is this, is this the thing that we started? Who's the decision maker? Again, if a discussion feels like it's going round and round, that might be because what's needed is a decision, and we're trying to make a decision by consensus, which is not how we make decisions. We make decisions using the advice process, where there is always and only ever one volunteer decision maker. So, maybe what needs to happen is that somebody needs to be that decision maker in the context of the meeting. And also, I think, in terms of putting forward proposals, the way in which Holacracy structures the kind of questions around objections to proposals and whether they're valid or not. I think it's really interesting. I printed this out from the kind of cheat sheet for the Holacracy governance meeting, Yeah, okay. I'm trying to translate this out of kind of like holacracy speak. So you might, well, yeah, one of the reasons why you might object to something in holacracy is you might say, okay, if we adopted this proposal, it would, and this is the speak, degrade the circle's capacity. So it would stop us as a team being able to achieve the goal of the team. And, you know, as a facilitator, your job is to then say, okay, is it really going to cause us harm or move us backwards? Or is it actually something that we should, oh, that's not a great one, sorry, this is, would that issue be created? Oh yeah, okay, so you might say, if we do this thing, it will cause a problem. And as a facilitator, you have to say, well, actually, does this thing cause that problem? Or would we have that problem anyway, independently of this thing? So there are quite strong tests. Again, I'll send this round afterwards, and it actually, as you read it through, it makes a bit more sense, I think. Yeah, and again, like a principle of accuracy is you can only raise objections speaking from roles that you hold. You're not allowed to raise objections speaking for other people's roles. So one of the things that you might say is, oh, you know, this proposal would stop me from doing one of my roles properly. And again, as a facilitator, you have to say, well, actually, would that limit you doing your role, or actually are you speaking about it limiting your ability to help somebody else do their role? Because if that's the case, then it's their objection to raise, and if they're not raising objections, it's not valid. You know, so there are quite high standards that they have in terms of kind of testing that. As I say, I'll send that round afterwards to have a look at. Yeah, and some kind of other things to think about. You know, I've talked before about the fact that groups have a kind of mood and a dynamic. You know, if you're in a meeting, you're kind of part of a group. Maybe your role in that meeting is to bring a certain energy to that group to help it feel productive and lively and creative by kind of bringing something, understanding your role in the group, understanding what you're contributing to the meeting, and some kind of useful questions that you can ask yourself as part of that role. Okay, so this has been about the subject of meetings and how we have better, more effective meetings, right? We have meetings where there's a clear sense of purpose, where there's a format which serves that purpose, and where everyone who's in the room knows the role that they're playing at that particular point in time. You know, some next steps that we might take from here, we can take this information away and we can start to use it in the meetings that we're having, and I'll share the kind of follow-up materials as well. We can start to think about whether there are, as a business or as individual kind of product circles, whether there are specific principles that we want to adopt in the way that we conduct our meetings. So for instance, kind of holacracy have an enduring principle about saying, you know, we'd rather have data. If there's ever a question that's being answered, we'd rather have data on that rather than just what kind of people feel about it. So maybe that would help us. I don't know, maybe there's some other things. We might want to think as an organisation about getting some training and meeting facilitation. You know, it's like it is a discipline in and of itself, right? And actually to have really good meetings, one way that you can do that is by having a facilitator make sure the meeting goes well. Or we can do some, but we probably have to bring someone external in to do that training for us. Or we can do some kind of internally run training where we explore some of these various formats, like the liberating structure stuff, get a bit more comfortable in using this stuff so that we know when we can bring it into a meeting to help a meeting move forward a little bit faster and service purpose clearer. Yeah, those are definitely some things that we can do. Maybe there are some other things as well. Yeah, I'd welcome questions and comments.
Yeah, I just thought the 1, 2, 4 all, that is an awesome idea.
It's great, isn't it? Yeah. And actually they have a load of stuff as, like, the 25-10 is really interesting as well. You know, if you weren't here for when we did this, but when we were doing the kind of purpose meeting with Global Tolerance, you know, if you have a kind of bit of a brainstorm and a group surfaces loads and loads of ideas, the process of then taking all of those ideas and kind of distilling them down, and what you do is, you know, everybody's handed a set of them and has to go around and explain them to people, and the person they've explained them to gives them a mark out of 10, and then every card is going to end up with a load of marks out of 10, and then we're going to be able to say, okay, these are the ones that the group gave the highest score to. So it's just a quick format that can take you from a situation where you're looking at a wall of ideas, all of which kind of seem good, but which ones do we want to take on? And you're like, oh, well, let's just distill this down, please, to the top 10 ideas using a format that we all know, go. And then like 10 minutes later, you're looking at the top 5. You know? It's great to have those kind of elements which you can just Bring him. Anything else?
Does anybody feel you might, so?
I was just saying, what do you think classifies as a successful meeting? Do you think it always has to have a tangible outcome, or can a successful meeting just be sort of like a brainstorming sort of session in that as well?
For me, I think like a meeting that's worked well is one that has served its purpose, right? So look, why do we have this meeting? This meeting is optional. If you don't attend, don't worry, it will be recorded. We'll be discussing the fundamentals of GrantTree's culture, helping to clarify and define them. Each week we'll cover a different topic. A list of possible future topics is on Trello. And this has been on there, like meeting formats has been on that list. So, you know, is that what we've done today? Have we come together and like learned some stuff about the culture, about what it is that we do here and how we can do it better? I think we have, right? So if you say, well, this is the purpose of the meeting, you know it's been a good meeting. If you can say, yeah, we served that purpose.
How do you determine if the purpose is worthwhile? Like to avoid sort of just meetings for meeting's sake?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's why I think it's important, like, to begin a meeting by saying, right, this is why we're all here, this is the purpose that we've come together for, because that's the point at which, if you want to say, actually, do we need to have a meeting for this? Do we need to have all of these people here for this? Or could this be better done another way? It's a really useful question. You know, we don't want to spend our time in meetings that aren't helpful, because we could be going off and doing something else, but sometimes we do need to come together as a group. So I think, like, my answer is dialogue, asking those questions, being willing to have that discussion. You know, do we all need to be here? Do I need to be here? Is it clear why we're having a meeting? Is a meeting the best thing to achieve this aim? You know, if we're not trying to harness the wisdom of the group or share information or ask for help, you know, why are we here? And if we are, and of those, you know, it's like, is the best way for me to ask for help or share information a meeting? Or would it be better as an email? Like, always thinking about that is really useful, I think, for an efficient organisation to be always thinking about that.
You mentioned a bit about holacracy. So if you're in a meeting, you've revised everything, you have to look at it from the way of, does this affect a role which you are part of? Is there a way that we can maybe kind of get that into, I don't know whether we have a meeting template, something that just says, Huddle will have the meeting questions that are answered as well. If there's something that can be done like that, as well as getting that question in there, as something that's constantly flagged, because I know a lot of the meetings I'm in, it kind of just can end up in a, this is how I feel, rather than it's actually going to have a tangible effect. Do you think it's worth kind of flagging that?
Yeah, well, I would definitely send round this kind of like governance meeting cheat sheet, because it's interesting to have a look at the kind of facilitator guidance. But I think that's the sort of thing where, like, doing a bit of kind of facilitator training business is really useful, because what you need, because it's actually quite difficult. It seems straightforward on paper, but actually in the middle of somebody speaking, to actually just say, are you speaking from your role, or are you expressing a concern on behalf of somebody else who could speak for themselves? You know, like, it's actually quite hard to find yourself just sort of basically putting your hand in their face, but doing it in a way that, like, is kind of non-violent and respects the meeting and keeps things moving forward. Particularly at first, once you get used to that and you become comfortable with it, it's much easier for anybody to do it. But kind of getting started on that, yeah, I think it's definitely worth. Anyway, as I say, sharing this around and starting to think, or maybe that comes into meeting principles. Maybe I have a principle which says, I don't know.
I think that's more, something where it's actually, rather than stuff that send around on people, we will have to assume that they've read it, more of a kind of bit where we can, flag in. Try.
How many of those meeting formats are there that you've documented there?
Okay, so there are the three kinds of holacracy meeting.
As in just a general figure, is it like 10, 50, 105? 150,000? Like, how many different kinds of meetings? So why I'm asking the question is, I'm thinking I would find it really helpful to have those posted around in meeting rooms.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of, so we become more aware of them.
Yeah, definitely. So, I think the point is that there are loads out there, and it's just about picking the ones that can work for us. So they're kind of like 3 Holacracy ones. Off the top of my head, I can think of the 3 Agile ones. And then the Liberating Structures formats, there are about 30 of them. But some of them are kind of formats for a whole meeting focusing on a very specific topic. And some of them are like elements that could be useful for like one particular agenda item. So going through them and picking out the ones that would be useful, yeah.
Should we have a meeting picking out the different meetings that are useful? So
Yeah. What format would you like it to take?
Do you think that it would be worthwhile maybe picking a few of them and trying them out for the next few huddles? Maybe? And seeing which works, and then everyone's had an example of how it would work, and maybe then try to apply it to the different meetings.
Yeah. Or I don't know if they will work. Huddles actually has a format that works quite well. It kind of knows what it's doing.
Maybe use it for the anchor circle meetings.
Yeah.
Or for
I'm just thinking like a weekly meeting,
Mhm.
a fair few people attend. I guess it could work with any, just trying out and seeing what's the next format, and then it's real life experience.
yeah, exactly.
We could have a meeting whose purpose it is to explore a new meeting format.
Yeah, like I think it's worth kind of playing with this stuff and becoming comfortable with it, so that when you need it, it's there and it's not kind of unfamiliar. Because what you don't want to do is find yourself in a situation where one of these things could actually be really helpful to you, but because you're kind of unfamiliar with it, it kind of goes badly, and you end up saying, oh no, this is taking too long. No, and then you go back to having a kind of meandering discussion that wasn't serving you. So I think kind of practicing is a good idea.
Some meetings are some feedback that I've had from like a while ago, just trying to organise meetings in a more structured way, has been like that structured meetings themselves kind of take an element of, some people don't seem to get on well being kind of put in a structure, and it doesn't feel like a kind of either energizing meeting or a natural meeting or suitable for how some people like to work. So is there anything kind of can do to basically not have, or is there any, or does it just have, do meetings just have to be well structured? I mean, is that like, is there any argument for something being a bit more, I don't know, what do you say to people who are effectively feeling like kind of boxed in and unenthused by highly structured meetings? Is there any kind of option to be like efficient?
I mean, I would
say structured.
Sorry. Yeah, I would definitely like the whole thinking behind, like the liberating structure stuff. Some of it seems kind of a bit weird and wacky at first, but the whole thinking behind it is to say, how do we create these meetings which are, in the space between structured and unstructured, in the space between like free form brainstorm, anything that happened could just be like, talk with no real reason, or like, the strict kind of like bell ringing agenda, like somewhere in the middle. It's designed to kind of provide some of that. There's nothing wrong with having a meeting that is totally unstructured and free form, but everybody should be there and everybody should consent to that being the format of the meeting. And if you have a group that needs to meet, and some people are like, we really want this to be a totally free-form, unstructured meeting, and other people are like, well actually, I find it hard to contribute in that way, I find it hard to get value out in that way, then that's a kind of discussion that needs to be had, doesn't it? About, okay, well what are we going to agree? How are we going to make a decision on this? How are we going to meet our varying needs for this collaboration? But that's an essential part of being a self-organizing business, is that we're able to say, these are my needs from our working relationship. And for other people to say, well, I have differing needs, and for us to negotiate that difference. So have a discussion is the best place to start. Have a discussion and try some of the kind of wackier formats and see what they do. Anyone? No? Okay, cool beans. Thanks very much, everybody.
Cool.